Ahead of President Trump's arrival here in Asia, you'd be forgiven for thinking that America and China were on a diplomatic collision course. But for all this year's tit-for-tat on tariffs and trade, the truth is that the world's economies are so intertwined that even President Xi of China travels on an American-built jumbo jet. Behind the scenes, diplomats from both sides laid the framework for a deal at the weekend. Though the body language between these leaders was largely stiff and formal.
But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good.
At this, their first face-to-face meeting in 6 years. Probably for domestic consumption back home. China's rise to superpower giving it parity, and Mr. Trump no doubt relishing his latest big power powwow on the global stage. But President Xi was never going to agree to stop buying oil from his main diplomatic ally, Russia. Mr. Trump said it wasn't really discussed.
President Xi is a great leader of a great country, and I think we're going to have a fantastic relationship for a long period of time, and it's an honor to have you with us.
While China's leader sounded much more cautious, talking about what he later called basic consensus.
Given our different national conditions, we do not always see eye to eye with each other. And it is normal for the two leading economies of the world to have frictions now and then.
Donald Trump announced afterwards that he would cut overall tariffs on China to 47%, and that China had agreed to a year's postponement on controlling its rare earth exports. The aggressive rhetoric of the recent past set aside, with the US president now due to visit China next April.
I thought it was an amazing meeting. He's a great leader of a very powerful, very strong country, China. And what can I say? It was an outstanding group of decisions, I think, that was made. A lot of decisions were made, too. There wasn't too much left out there.
Both sides have now backed away from a global trade war, with pragmatism winning the day. Though we still don't know whether Chinese-owned TikTok will be allowed to operate in America or whether China will one day invade Taiwan. Though tensions have certainly been reduced for now. I'm now joined by Han Lin, who is the China director for the Asia Group consultancy, and he's now in Shanghai. Han, thank you for joining us. I wanted to ask you first whether this meeting, this summit, whether it is the breakthrough that President Trump says it is. I mean, he's talking about it in terms of it being a 12 out of 10 success of a meeting.
Well, we love that optimism, and certainly looking at the announcements, Trump has mentioned it's a great meeting. Now, interestingly, on the China side, their response has been more tempered, more general, but they haven't made any major contradictions either. So in many ways, this meeting represents more of a tactical pause than a strategic breakthrough, but given the history and trend of US-China relations, maybe that's the best we can expect.
Do you think this caution from President Xi is for domestic consumption, that he wants to appear tough with the Americans? Or are the Chinese basically unsure of President Trump? They don't really believe that there is peace in our time with such a unpredictable president?
So the way China looks at it is that they're familiar with the Trump playbook, given that their experience during the first Trump administration. So in the second round, during this current time period, they feel like they have a deeper toolkit to respond and retaliate if necessary, and they've learned the lesson, which is if Trump hits, they should hit back easily and with strength, and ideally keep it proportional. But certainly one thing that they have kept in mind is that, at least for this purpose of this meeting, they want to try to maintain some level of de-escalation, because if they can keep US-China relations fairly calm, it allows them to concentrate more on a lot of domestic development and reforms, specifically in their upcoming 15th five-year plan.
And with Mr. Trump due to visit China next April, which has now been announced, that sort of binds him in, doesn't it? I mean, it means that they both have to lower the aggressive rhetoric for that meeting to take place, which suggests you might have a period of stability. But there again, President Trump might change his mind.
Absolutely. We really can't predict any occasional flare-ups that do happen. But it is an important point that on the calendar, they're looking to target a Trump-Xi meeting in the early part of next year, and also at the latter part of the year when President Xi comes to the US for the G20. So the fact that you've got some timeline and milestones put in place of when other summits should happen, it allows and acts as a disciplining process, ideally to keep some of the more hawkish elements on both sides relatively at bay, because nobody wants to really spoil the summits.
And who has more leverage here? Is it the Chinese side because they control the exports of these crucial rare earths, which are used in so much technology these days? Or is it the American side, which of course takes a lot of Chinese exports?
The US has considerable leverage in their control of foundational technologies, the large consumer market, the control of the US dollar, and so forth. But China has its own sources of resilience, its own large market, its manufacturing control base, and so forth. But at least in the short term, although the US looks like they have a bit of an upper hand and able to dictate the pace and intensity of discussions, China is playing a different game. They're focused on a longer time horizon, and there's a suggestion that at least within this agreement, they were able to achieve reasonable objectives with very little concessions.
It does make you wonder what all that tension, which has dominated most of this year, what it was all for, really. If we've not gone back to the status quo ante, but we've returned to a much sort of calmer situation than there was before.
Despite a lot of the tensions, it seems like pragmatism now reigns. And this is important given the calendar of both presidents. So for President Trump, he needs to be focused on next year's midterms. And so it's in his interest that there is a more stable US-China relationship. And for China's standpoints, President Xi has a lot of unfinished business in looking to strengthen China's economy and to insulate it from more future US pressure and to really strengthen technology self-resiliency. So there's a lot on his plate. So both sides are at the right time with the right incentives to try to keep things fairly controlled.
And to keep things fairly controlled, no real discussion as far as we know about China's intentions towards Taiwan, whether it might invade. President Trump even saying that China buying Russian oil, in spite of its invasion of Ukraine, not even discussed.
So it was clear that the ambitions of the discussion were actually much more modest, and they tended to focus on just trade while avoiding topics such as technology supply chains, such as security tensions, Taiwan, Russia oil embargo, and so forth. And I think that was purposely done so that these sensitive topics don't derail the discussion at hand.
And TikTok operating in America, the Americans have said they don't want it to remain Chinese owned if it's going to operate in America. We don't know whether that's been resolved either, do we?
We don't know if it's been resolved, but we do get a sense that the momentum is to try to resolve this deal.
And for President Xi, I suppose, just appearing alongside President Trump in the way that he did, there is now a kind of parity between these men. This is the top table these days, and they hadn't met for 6 years. So, it's a big deal.
The fact that President Xi and President Trump are on screen looking as equal, that in itself for President Xi is very strong for him politically in China right now, because one of the key pressures that even he has had is that there has been a lot of direction for him to act strong, to not show that China can be bullied by the US. And so China's policy to really push back, in fact, to even hit back hard, quick, and with strength, really justifies where President Xi is today to be able to show, in fact, he's been a very strong leader for China.
Han Lin from the Asia Group, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Shanghai.
Thanks for having me.